families have all the information and all the tools that they need as much as possible to help them be as solid as they can in their own personal, emotional, and mental wellness. This week, we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which of course celebrates the life and achievements of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who labored tirelessly until his murder on April 4th in 1968. He was the voice of the American, or one of the voices of the American Civil Rights Movement, which worked to end racial segregation and discrimination and worked for equal rights for all people. And it is now 2019, and it is the 51st year since his death. And today, we are talking about racism, invisibility, and the impact on mental health of minority individuals who face it. Research shows us that today, young children who experience discrimination are at heightened risk for mental health and behavioral problems. Some might say, and I've heard this, and maybe you've heard it too, that children are too young to really understand the concepts of racism and discrimination, and that most of them are not aware of it. But research tells us that there is a different reality. Even 2018 research documents that when the concept of discrimination is explained in really simple terms to children, even as young as the age of 7, and when they're asked if they've ever felt discriminated against by their peers or by their teachers or by other people because of things like their skin color, right, or their language or their accent or their culture or their country of origin, more than half of the children reported that they have had experiences of discrimination and racism. And so if you think about that from an individual perspective, and experiencing that either overtly or covertly, discrimination over the course of a lifetime, you can begin to see potentially how that then makes connections with mental health outcomes for individuals. And so when we think about the often racially charged rhetoric that we hear in our society and the unveiled, completely out there racist commentary that has been really common and accepted coming from the highest levels of our government, and then the constant media coverage, we're callous if we dismiss it and choose to ignore the idea that there is an impact that this political climate has on the mental health of minority individuals. And so today, as we commemorate Dr. King, we are going to look at ways that adults can cope, along with ideas that parents may be able to use to teach their children to cope with racism and discrimination in today's society. And so, with that, joining us in the studio today is Kyle Fox. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So Kyle is a doctoral candidate in humanities and African studies. Tell us a little bit about that, and then tell us just when we just kind of proposed this topic a while back and kind of asked how you might want to talk about it. Tell me what piqued your interest. Tell me why you felt like it was important to talk about this.
Okay. Well, first, I am a doctoral candidate in humanities and African American studies at Clark Atlanta University. I'm currently writing my dissertation, which focuses on the construction of gender identities, gendered and race identities, to be specific. When we first talked about formatting this show, it piqued my interest because racism had been a hot topic, right? Because of all the murders of black and brown bodies, men and women. But no one has ever just tackled the issue. What's going on here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then for us to add this invisibility and mental health component. Yes, we're visible, but our plight and the issues that we deal with
Is invisible.
Yeah. And then it affects our mental health because we're constantly bombarded with these images.
Yeah.
We watched a man be murdered on Facebook. That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, okay, just a ratings draw for most of the networks.
Yeah.
So that's why I was interested in this.
Yeah. And so when you think about what you would say is probably one of the most important things, one important thing that should give us context around talking about this issue of racism and invisibility. Maybe we should unpack that whole invisibility piece a little bit first, right?
Right.
What does that mean? Somebody listening and hearing us say that minorities are invisible, right? And then their head going, okay, I see minorities all the time. I interact with minorities all the time. I hear the rhetoric. I, don't agree with it. And I speak to my minority friends and we talk about it a little bit. What is that about? What does invisible really mean? Let's unpack that.
If I may, I'm going to take a quote from the famous Ralph Ellison and his book, Invisible Man, page 3. I am an invisible man. I am invisible. Understand? Simply because people refuse to see me. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. So I think when we frame this thing called invisibility, everyone comes into an experience or an interaction with someone else as having already formed preconceptions or notions about that person. Well, if you're really just interacting with me based upon what you already think,
Yeah.
you're not seeing who I am.
Okay.
You don't care about this. You don't care about my physical presence. You're actually asserting your agency onto me. So you're stripping me of that identity.
So what you're saying is you see me in the context of what society says I am.
Yes, definitely.
And that's what you see. But in reality, there is not an engagement in which I am truly known by you.
Absolutely.
And this could be, we're making a general statement, person to person, right? And while we're talking about this in the context of race and discrimination, that is a universal concept. What is the idea, the concept of people really truly being known by other people? It suggests, when we talk about like couple relationships, we talk about the intimacy of a couple relationship and the idea that my mate truly knows me. They know the inside of me. They know the pain of my past. They know the pain of my current experiences. They might know the joys of my past and the joys of my current experiences. They know who I am, what makes me tick, right? And so you're talking about, when we put it back now in the context of race and discrimination and invisibility, right? It is, so even though you're my friend, you don't really know me because maybe you don't ask about certain things. Okay, so, right. So maybe you don't ask about certain things, but how do you ask? How many people might want to ask and don't know how to ask, or afraid to ask the wrong thing, or afraid to say it the wrong way, or, do you have any white friends or Hispanic friends? Do you have friends who are not like you? Whether that is gender not like you, right? Because even gender, across genders, there's different experiences. Racially not like you, ethnically not like you, culturally not like you, sexual orientation not like you, whatever, right? What does it mean across all those different realms to truly know the other person? What does that mean? To see them.
I think you have to be interested
Okay.
and be open to want to know someone else. I sometimes feel like as a society we're very selfish. I don't need to know what your issues are. I don't need to know your experiences at all. And so I feel like it's very selfish of us as a society. We're taught to be like that, unfortunately. So in order for me to want to get to know you intimately, I need to take the time and remove myself from me to want to be intimate with you. Whether that's sitting down and really closing my mouth to take in what you have to say about your experiences of who you are as a person, even at the basic levels of being a man, because I would never understand that. So.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things is basically knowing yourself. Before you can get to know anyone else, you have to know yourself and your biases. And without knowing your biases, how can you open yourself up to being able to relate to someone else? You have to know yourself in order to be able to know others.
I think also it's about asking the right questions. Often we like to ask these open-ended questions. Who are you? That's so broad.
Right.
And I'm going to give you basically my resume.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
not going to go into
Yeah.
any detail.
Yeah.
So we have to actually ask questions.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So, of course, the next question is, what are the right questions, right? But before we get to what are the right questions, hold that thought, and let's make sure we come back to that, because I want to go back to a minute to what you said, Juan, when you said you have to know yourself and your bias, right? So, what about the person that says, I don't really have bias. I'm not racist, right? I don't. Everybody is.
Yeah, I was about to say, everybody has
at a
their,
certain
yes,
level
has their biases.
are a bit racist. And I'm sorry, I hate to say that.
Why do you think that?
Why do I think that? Because
Or why do you say
of
that?
where we come from, how we're brought up. I mean, it's just a little. Don't you don't do that, Kyle.
We can't have looks. Because I'm going to ask you. We're going to have to unpack it.
I just feel like I didn't grow up like someone else. So, of course, how I was raised is going to be different. How I view people is different. From the South to the North, there are different biases. There's little racial slurs that are spoken, undertones, throughout generations. If you've got multi-generations behind you, there's some racism back there that I don't feel like we've ever dealt with. And so that's why I say, for me, everybody's racist at some level in their life. What was that, Kyle?
Okay, it was the academician coming out. That Black Studies part. So I think we like to throw around this word racist.
Okay.
And in a Western power construct that is America, Black and minority individuals cannot be racist.
I knew this was coming.
Because we
I knew
do
this was
not
coming.
occupy
A position of
a
power.
position of power in economics or in just regular society. That's not our wheelhouse. Now,
What do we have?
I think we can all be prejudiced,
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
That's right.
but we can't be racist.
Yes.
So that's what that was.
Yes.
That was
Okay, I appreciate it.
And that's an important distinction.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think
It is an
that's a
important
big thing.
distinction.
Yeah, you do
And
have to be able to.
that's right.
To make that distinction
That's right.
between racism, prejudice, biases. There's distinction that you have to make in order to understand the truth behind whatever we're talking about, the
Right.
word itself. Because I can kind of agree. I can agree with you, Kyle, when you say us being racist. That right, we're not in power economically, position wise, so we're not racist. In the same token, I see what you two are saying, Monique, when it comes to the way you're brought up and the way that you're taught to relate to individuals. So in a sense, it goes back to a play on words on the context in which you're using the actual word racism, because some look at it one way where others will look at it another way.
I think part of the conversation, and we have to get back to what are the right questions, but part of the conversation is, to help shape this for just the common individual, white, Black, Hispanic, that just interacts with people just on a general basis, that will say, I don't interact with people in prejudicial ways. I don't interact with people. I don't discriminate against people. I do feel like I treat people equally, and I don't think that I'm better than my Black counterparts or my Hispanic counterparts or anybody, right? And so the context sometimes that we need to really place around that is, it's not necessarily whether you think that you treat people in a certain way. As we are each positioned within society, there are levels at which we benefit from societal construct, some people more than others. And it's embedded in the fabric of our culture, our institutional systems, right? And so when we talk about this idea of invisibility, and going back to that word, and it being connected to whether or not people see for minority individuals, whether the people see my experience, see what really is happening for me or not happening for me and people like me in this culture. Whereas for others who are within the dominant culture, those experiences aren't part of their natural life. That's kind of what we need to talk about when we talk about the idea of invisibility. Understanding that there is an invisible power structure that often can't be seen, but is extremely impactful. And as it impacts within all of those social systems, the impact itself is also not just on the economics of individuals and not just on the social status of individuals, it's also on their health, right? There's disparities in just health, there's disparities, all of that's built into this whole system and contributes to this idea of you don't really see me and see my experience, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so putting it kind of in that context may be helpful. So then if we talk about, and we still didn't get to what I wanted to get to with knowing yourself, part of knowing yourself doesn't just come from you thinking about yourself. Part of understanding, at least for me, myself, comes from the result of my interactions with other people. And when I see the outcomes of those interactions, sometimes I learn something about myself that helps me know myself better.
Right.
And so interactions with people not like me and really delving in and asking the right questions can help me learn more, not just about them and understanding them, but it will help me learn about me,
Right.
right? What
Right.
were my misconceptions? What are the things that I buy into? And why does it work for me to buy into those things, even if they negatively impact my friend, who is a
Right.
marginalized individual,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what about the questions? What are the right questions? I don't know.
I don't know the right. And that's sad to say that we can sit and say we have to ask the right questions, but I don't think until you're actually in the situation or
Yeah.
the interaction with the person that you would actually
Know what the right question is. All right, well, that's a good place for us to take a quick break, and when we come back, we can unpack that a little bit more as well. You're listening to the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show. We'll be back in a minute.
Do you want peace in your family relationships instead of conflict? Do you want a safe, loving marriage instead of one that is failing? Are you troubled about what's happening with your children and need help for them? At Legacy Changers Counseling Centers, the goal is to strengthen individuals and families with cutting-edge emotional and mental health interventions. The exceptionally trained counselors at Legacy provide the specialized guidance you need in a safe environment of belonging so that you can make the life changes you and your loved ones need. Get real help for your emotional and relationship needs. Call today at 404-334-7575. That's 404-334-7575. You can also find us on the web at legacychangerscounseling.com. Call now and transform your life today. 404-334-7575 or legacychangerscounseling.com.
Welcome back to the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show. We are talking today about racism, invisibility, and the impact on the mental health of marginalized individuals. So marginalized individuals, what does that mean? We're really talking about individuals who experience firsthand discrimination, prejudicial experiences, racism, and who are in situations where they are oppressed. And so we're talking about racial minorities, we're talking about ethnic minorities, we're talking about individuals of different sexual orientations, we're talking about gender issues, women, for example, we're talking about national origin, we're talking about individuals who are not necessarily part of the dominant culture and don't always have the advantages inherent in dominant culture experiences. And so we ended the last segment talking about invisibility and how do we think about and kind of conceptualize that and unpack it, knowing that there are people in our society who feel even within the context of their regular lives, that their personal experiences of racism and discrimination are not understood, are not felt, are not valued, are not validated, and it is unclear. They kind of live with it under the radar. It makes me think of, I went to Charlottesville, North Carolina, right after the riots a couple summers ago to do some crisis counseling down there. And I ran into a photographer just walking in the mall, a young black gentleman who had been in the middle of the riot at that time. And he was documenting it in picture professionally. And he remembers being attacked on that day as part of the riot. And as we talked about it days later, this was maybe a week or two, no, that's not true, this was like a month later. He said in the week following the riot, after it was done, and he was in the mall area, and so it's an outside cobblestone big area, and so the stores are on either side of the cobblestone, and it's just a walking path. You don't drive necessarily, right? He said he was in that area just talking with people and taking more pictures, and he was attacked again in the aftermath of it, right? And he said he doesn't talk about it. He shuts that stuff down. And he didn't tell. Oh, now I remember. He didn't tell me. His wife told me.
Wow.
His wife told me, and she said he shuts that stuff down. Right? She said he doesn't engage with it. He won't tell you that it happened, and we started this conversation that made me think of invisibility. Right? He's just hiding in plain sight. And nobody really would know necessarily that that's his experience. And what does that do to an individual? To feel that, to understand that this is my experience, but as a black man, but I'm not gonna, there's no space for me to speak that experience.
I actually think it's a part of, it becomes detrimental to the psyche, but it's systematic and cultural. We've been conditioned to hide our true selves, to hide our feelings and emotions. And for someone to go through an event like that, I'm sure that there must be some type of PTSD associated with it.
Yeah.
But because you're supposed to be this strong macho man,
Right.
you can't you can't show that emotion.
Yeah.
You can't express
Right.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, we will never know whether he experienced anything beyond an acute stress reaction, right?
Right.
And so we know acute stress the first month, but beyond that, we may be looking into more full-blown PTSD, but there's no way to assess that unless, you know, really assessing it. But you're pointing to what that does to the mental health of an individual, right?
Yes.
And so attached to those types of things, you're going to see the emergence of depression, anxiety.
Yes.
What would it be like to have those experiences, know that you can't necessarily talk about this in a major way, right, and bring light to it, and you're walking down the street, you don't know what's coming at you.
Right. Right.
You have no idea what's coming, right? And so that creates a level of anxiety. Even if we pull that back, right, and say that's an extreme experience. Let's just say that for argument's sake, right? So, and say, well, the more common experience is microaggressions, right? Somebody may make a comment, a racist comment in your presence, right? And people around you will laugh about it, right? And most people around you are laughing about it. And so if you bring up, well, you know, that's not funny to me, right? You're now the odd man out,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And you're bringing down the crowd, and you're right.
Lighten up.
Lighten up. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly the comment you're going to get. Think about multiple experiences like that. Those are experiences that, what's the word? Not devalue, but disregard, or just say that your perspective is not important. It's not valid.
Right.
You might have an emotion about what you just heard, but you need to lighten up. It's not that important. Think about that repeatedly, 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 repeatedly.
So do you think this gentleman possibly has that feeling where it doesn't matter whether I was abused or not, so there's no need for me to talk about it? You know,
Could be. Mm-hmm.
not just as a black man, but the people that were there. Nobody's gonna do anything.
Nobody's going to do anything.
So why even talk about it? So let me stuff it and put it where it is with the rest of the stuff that has happened in the past. You know,
And
That's
so what
dangerous.
happens when we stuff emotion?
it's not healthy.
Definitely not healthy. I mean, of course, I mean, when you do that, especially in extreme instances like that, you do develop forms of PTSD. Because let's say you not walking in that same area, but you get to an area that it just pops in your head that, hey, this could happen at any time. Just because it happened there twice, then what's to say it's not going to happen here? What's to say it's going to happen there? Then I start isolating. You know, I'm not going out unless I absolutely have to. You know, by stuffing it, that's exactly what you're doing. Is you're becoming and going into a phase in your life where you're starting to develop PTSD, you're starting to develop depression, you're having raised anxiety levels, and stuffing is definitely not a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And on the whole stuffing thing, if we actually just take stuffing, put stuff in a box, right? Eventually that box is going to explode.
Exactly. Exactly.
And people don't typically look at boxes overflowing or exploding as something violent or
Right.
as an act of rage.
Right.
But it is.
Yes.
Like, if you take a physical box, you fill it till it can't be filled anymore.
Exactly.
It's to rip at the
Exactly.
seams,
It
absolutely.
has to go somewhere.
It has to go
It has
somewhere.
to
And,
go
and,
somewhere.
and that's where we move into the mental health piece, because really
Right.
what you guys are describing is a continuum of potential
Right.
reaction, right? And
Right.
so you have your rage reaction out here on one end, and then if you go all the way backward, you have varying amounts of reaction in terms of what that could be. So if you don't end up with rage reactions, what happens when we stuff anger, right? So you're talking about anger. When we stuff anger, that leads to depression. That can show up as depression. That can show up as anxiety sometimes, right?
Right.
It may not show up as PTSD,
Right.
right? And so we know that in some cases where there are extreme experiences of racial discrimination, where there may be violence involved that you are at the receiving end of, or you see it, right? You're in the middle of the situation and you see it, then there's the possibility of an acute stress or PTSD developing down the road. But beyond that, if we don't get there, what we have is low levels of rage, anger,
Yes.
just in the system that just kind of pile up, and what that can come out as is depression. That's where you can see
Right.
depression. And that can be attached to this idea that you pointed to of what is the point? Nothing's really going to change. Nothing's different today in 2019 than it was in the 1960s, in the height of Dr. King's movement, when we thought everything was changing, right? So what's the hope? Right? If there is an embraced idea within an individual of, what's the point? There really isn't any hope. Therein lies as well seeds of low-grade depression. Just whatever.
But I think this goes back to Kyle's initial point was asking the right questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So in thinking about that, what would you want someone to inquire about who you are? Like, what would the question be? Like, how could you start that dialogue? Because I've heard people on both sides of the fence say, well, I don't want to bring up, the whole topic of race and racial discrimination because it gets too heated. I think people, and this goes back to our teachings in school, a lot of people don't like conflict
Yeah.
Yeah.
because it gets heated really fast. And I think you can get heated but still be able to maintain a level of respect for one another. You know what I'm saying? So how do you start that dialogue with people like, you do matter? Sir, Mr. Cameraman, I understand they violated you. How are you feeling about that? Like, tell me your experience, what it was like, or like, what question would you want someone to ask you?
I think questions should come from, a couple of places. One is you can ask questions of particular biases that, you may have towards that individual or that said group of people. Or you can also ask questions regarding stereotypes that you've heard or that you live with. So I think that's would be a good place.
So you mean, like, if I were going to have a conversation with Kyle,
Mm-hmm.
I should ask Kyle things like, can you tell me about your experiences of bias in your lifetime? That's what you mean?
Right.
Okay.
That, and the flip side,
Uh-huh.
you can ask questions in regards to your own personal experience of bias or
Okay.
your own personal biases towards anything dealing with Kyle, or same thing with stereotypes.
I like that. When you said the questions should come from two places, I was thinking immediately the heart and the head. So the head guides the initial question, and then the heart follows.
Right.
Because who doesn't want to experience some type of empathy when someone is actually getting to know them or trying to get to know them? Right.
Right.
So I definitely like
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
So who doesn't want to experience empathy? And so when you say that, say more about what you're saying.
Say more.
Say more.
It sounded.
You're not wrong, though. You're right.
And so if we take this current political climate, right, where we have our president constantly talking about building walls, keeping immigrants out, whatever. Just a generation before him, his family is a family of immigrants. No one built a wall to keep you away. So why don't you just go back to that initial, how did you get here? Or how did your family get here?
Because that makes too much sense.
It makes
Right.
too much sense,
It's-
but
it's not- we're not dealing in.
it's called empathy.
Oh, right. That's what you were trying to get at.
Oh God, I'm glad it's not me this time.
You're rubbing off. I have to stop hanging around you, Nick.
Oh Lord. Yes.
So you're saying, in terms of empathy, if there was just a recognition
Just recognize.
that we're all immigrants to some degree in this country.
Yeah.
Okay, well, short that recognition. What we're saying, what I think you're also pointing to is, someone talked about wanting, just being interested, being curious, right? And wanting to know. Empathy is the idea of, I can't really step into your shoes, but I wonder if I were to step into your shoes,
Right.
what that might be like.
And I think that's the place we have to start, because I can never walk in someone else's shoes that I have never experienced. You know what I'm saying? But if I can step it, like, just be curious. What is it like for you? One of my favorite books is Black Like Me. It was written, in the 70s, where the white gentleman shaved his hair, dyed his skin, and literally lived as a black man for a period of time. And he was able to experience for the first time what it was like to be beat up just because of the color of his skin. Why are you looking at, this white woman over here? And he didn't think anything of it, but just to be beat up for something, looking at somebody, not having bad thoughts, but to walk in someone else's shoes, that's powerful.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
don't forget that thought, because engineer says I have to take a break, so I gotta take a break. So as soon as we come back, we'll go right to your comment.
Okay.
We'll be right back with the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show. with Kyle Fox, who is a doctoral candidate at Clark Atlanta University in humanities
Yes.
and African American studies.
Yes.
Got that right?
Yes.
All right, good. And so we've been talking about, well, we left off with Monique's question, and Kyle was going to get started answering that question.
Yeah. So I wanted to mention, as Monique previously talked about black-like man, the man living as a black man for a period of time. The famous Jane Elliott experiment, when she took the kids with blue eyes and brown eyes and separated them according to their eye color, right? I think that was the perfect moment where children, or the perfect instance where we see children actually understand this whole notion of racism and discrimination. I show that to my classes every semester because it's like you never really understand how privileged you are until someone takes basic necessities or restricts you from doing basic things that you do every single day. And for her to do that with third graders and prove that we all have inherent biases, and then that we're all socialized in some way to believe certain things, I think it was an amazing thing.
I worry about those studies. I do, because I always want to make sure they go back and, take care of the children or take care, psychologically.
It's a follow-up work.
Yeah, and I don't know if a lot of people think about that. Because how much is staying with these children, if the follow-up is not done, and that's a concern.
But I also think if we don't do the follow-up, there's a study to be done there, because it's like, that's real life. No one is following up with us being black people, saying, what was your experience like? Well, I'm living it, and what do you want? That's it.
Let's see.
So let's go back to the questions, right? We started talking about asking the right questions, right? And so, one, you brought up being curious and asking about experiences of bias that someone else is experiencing, and also doing an internal exploration, or what are the biases that I have as
Right.
well, right? And so, as I think about the idea of asking someone of a different race, culture, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender, what are the biases that you experience, and what is that like for you? I can hear some of my students saying, oh my gosh, I don't think I could ask that question. Number one, what if they took it the wrong way? What if they got mad, right? And then I could hear other students saying, why are they asking me? I don't even know that I really want to answer that question, because what's the ulterior motive? And how much can I say? And if I say too much, what then? Can they handle, just all those other questions that pop up that make these conversations so difficult,
Yeah.
right? It's not as simple as we're saying it, obviously,
Right.
right? But it's got to start somewhere.
Definitely.
It's got to start somewhere. So
Definitely.
then what about the person that says, I don't know that I can ask, I want to ask that question. I'd be afraid of the conversation that could come.
I think this goes back to what you said earlier about us really, I don't want to get your words wrong, but about us really being open to getting to know each other. Like, we have to have these hard conversations. And often race, gender, sex, and sexuality, those are difficult conversations to have because you don't want to offend anyone. But if you're honestly curious about something, I think you should ask. I mean, there are ways that you are to ask without being offensive. It's not like I'm just going to come up to you and be like, hey.
Oh, don't do that?
Find a segue.
Right.
I've always been curious about.
See, now you're adding to it. You just told people to ask about it. All right. So then, what does the lead up look like? Because this is important. People will want to know. So if I can't just go ask, how do I know when I can go ask? And what does that mean? And typically what we say is there's got to be some level of relationship that already exists with
Right.
an individual when you branch into topics like this,
Right.
right? There's got to be a level of established safety in your engagement with an individual
Right.
that will make it, well, at least enhance the possibility, increase the possibility that it'll be a fruitful conversation, that you might get an honest answer from someone. And you might get the honest answer from that person because there's a sense that they have that, one, you're not going to purposely take it the wrong way, that you do authentically and genuinely want to know the answer to the question, potentially, and that you would be open to hearing, but also having a conversation and not necessarily negating everything that I say with a but what about this, but what about that. Oh, so then that's part of the conversation. Don't do that.
I think you have to, one, like you said, safety. That was the first thing. But seek for an understanding on both parts. Why is this person asking me this question? What came to me was social cultural class. It was my favorite class. And I'll never forget, one of my classmates stopped and asked me, hey, do you mind if we sometimes sit down and have a conversation about race and what it's like for you being a black woman? Because I think at the time we were talking about the gentleman that was killed, Michael something, because I had shared, I have a son and he's big and it makes me nervous for him to go out. You know what I'm saying? Because they're going to be intimidated by his size, don't know that he's a gentle giant, right? And so she pulled me aside. She felt safe with me. And then I was like, why is she asking me? What is this? And I wanted to understand what her question was, and she wanted to understand where I stood with this. So I think those two things have to be, prevalent to have this type of conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to start with building a rapport with that person. This conversation is not going to be a one-time, one-day event. It's going to be a relationship building event. You're going to have to be able to start gaining that rapport with that individual in order to have this conversation. Again, it's not going to be something that you can just pick up out of the blue and start asking away, because again, you're going to have people that shut down and don't feel comfortable with the conversation because they don't know the person. But so it's going to start with building a rapport with the individual in order to ask those difficult questions. We can sit here all day and say, let's get a group together and just start asking questions and feel free to ask your questions, but that's not going to work.
No.
It's not going to work. It's going to have to be an ongoing process. I mean, it took how long for this to get this way? It's going to take even longer for it to even start seeing an effect on it. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight.
And then when we ask questions during these conversations, we're just getting a snapshot.
Yeah.
We're not getting the full story or the experience, right?
Right.
So then we leave, or people may come away thinking, oh, well, I do know about this experience. Such and such said, blah, blah, blah. When
Right.
that was just a minuscule.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and not only is it a minuscule moment and just a snapshot, it is just a snapshot for that person, right? The reality is, if you sat down with Monique as a light-skinned black woman
Right.
and Dr. Sutherland as a dark-skinned black woman and asked the same question,
Right.
you get two different answers
Yeah. Two different experiences.
and two different experiences.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
was about to say that
Yeah.
it's going to be more so. You're going to have to get a variety of experiences in order for you to really start to relate. Because, like you said, no two people experience the same thing the same way. So it's going to take, not just a conversation with two people. It's going to take a family of people.
Ongoing conversations. Ongoing.
Yes.
It really will develop into a part of your life.
Right.
To be
Right.
curious and to want to understand
Right.
the experiences of other people. And we're not just, while we are in some ways talking about white and black, black and Hispanic, white and Asian, right? Asian and Hispanic, Native American, Indian, and black. I mean, we're talking about all of those because everybody's in a position to have to
Right.
learn about the
Yes.
experiences of somebody else, not
Right.
just white people about black people, right? That's just one,
Right.
right?
Right.
So just understand that this is a wider societal conversation that really just needs to happen. And so when we then kind of pull all of this together into what does that mean about impact on mental and emotional health and the functioning of individuals, really think about it in terms of, I'll just give you an example. I remember working within an organization as one of very few minorities at that organization. And I had within the space of, I'd had a year of nothing, just, relative fine interactions. And then all of a sudden, I had 3 back-to-back racial discrimination incidents
Wow.
in different realms of that organization. And I remember experiencing a numbness that I didn't put it together at the time, and I couldn't explain it. It was just like this, all of a sudden, this fog, right, that had kind of settled. And some of that came from the shock of the experiences happening back to back like that. And realizing, okay, wait, where am I? And what is all of this? So then that translates into what does depression look like? It looks like I don't really want to go to work today. Right? It looks like I think I'm going to stay in my office and just do what I got to do.
Isolating.
Right? Isolating.
Yeah.
Right? It looks like examining every interaction and every conversation. And okay, so is this what this seems to be face to, on the surface? Or is there more that I just don't really see and that I really need to be looking for and aware of so that I can protect myself? So that those incidents that impacted me so heavily, stuff's not going to impact me as much, right? Because I got caught off guard.
Right.
So when we talk about the idea of what is the impact of racial discrimination and incidents of discrimination on mental and emotional health and functioning, those are the kinds of things that we're talking about, that people looking in won't necessarily see, right? Would be invisible to the natural eye, right? And so that's kind of what we're talking about. And so if somebody were to ask me, right, and so you're talking about ask the questions, what has been your experience of bias or racism, right? I would have to, it depends on who's asking me, right? And yeah, why do you want to know? And where am I? Where are you asking me? Within what context, right? If you asked me this outside of this context, or if someone outside of this context asked me, would I answer differently? Right? Just all of those types of things come into play. And if I don't want to answer, that means I don't feel safe. And if I don't feel safe, what does that mean about how that impacts my emotional health? If I don't feel safe in a space that I spend a lot of time in, all of that plays into when we think about practically, what does this look like on the ground for an individual, right? Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about.
Well, you mentioned this fog, and going back to race, because that's what we're talking about, basically. When we kept witnessing these murders, right, of black and brown men, boys and men, I think a lot of us experienced that fog and didn't know what it was. But for myself, I experienced it. It was like I can't watch the news.
Yeah.
I can't be on social media right now. Not only because of the commentary, but I just can't see it. And then positioning myself in that reality.
Yes.
Because although I'm real thin, I am 6'5", and I'm intimidating to someone.
Right.
Just place yourself in this. Like, that could easily be me not handling a traffic stop properly.
Yeah.
And I could be laid out on the road or whatever. It's just, I don't know, it's the fog.
And just the way you said it, and then we're going to go to a break, but just the way you said it, not handling a traffic stop properly. Like there's a way, other than just the norm, to handle a traffic stop because there's a fear for your life.
Right.
Think about how that plays on the mental and emotional psyche.
Yeah.
What does that do to an individual
Yeah.
whose parents tell them, here's how you have to operate when you're stopped by the police. Keep your hands on the wheel. Don't reach for anything. Don't reach for your registration. Don't reach for anything before they get to you, whatever they would, I've had parents tell me, I've had to train my child about what to do and what not to do. Say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Don't look at them in the eye. Don't do anything that appears even remotely threatening. Imagine if you have to have that conversation with your kid. What does that do to the psyche
Yeah.
to know? We'll talk more when we come back. You're listening to the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show.
Do you want peace in your family relationships instead of conflict? Do you want a safe, loving marriage instead of one that is failing? Are you troubled about what's happening with your children and need help for them? At Legacy Changers Counseling Centers, the goal is to strengthen individuals and families with cutting-edge emotional and mental health interventions. The exceptionally trained counselors at Legacy provide the specialized guidance you need in a safe environment of belonging so that you can make the life changes you and your loved ones need. Get real help for your emotional and relationship needs. Call today at 404-334-7575. That's 404-334-7575. You can also find us on the web at legacychangerscounseling.com. Call now and transform your life today. 404-334-7575 or legacychangerscounseling.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show. And so, we went to break and, while the break, Monique said that even as I was describing what I was describing, it was creating some anxiety within her. Talk about that a little bit.
It's very nerve-wracking to be fearful for your life. Even just driving your car, because I speed, right? And so I've gotten stopped.
No.
No,
I've gotten stopped.
I can't
many
imagine
times.
that.
no.
I can't imagine that.
And so growing up, driving fast, you don't think about it. And I've never thought about when I get pulled over. It's just like, here, yes, I know what I was doing, whatever. But the last time I got stopped, I didn't know what to do. I promise you. And I was like, okay, there's nobody on this road but me and this police officer.
Wow.
I'm like, do I put my hands here? Like, I'm literally moving, like, what do I do? And I'm getting nervous to the point where, like, my throat is tightening up. Like, I'm having all these responses. And it was just like, why am I having this response? I've done nothing wrong outside of maybe driving too fast, But our children have to understand that. So that anxiety that I feel, I've now placed that on my children.
So is that anxiety just the regular anxiety that people just experience when the cops pull you over? Because most people, regardless of race, gender, nobody wants the cops to pull them over. We don't like you guys, Juan.
Yeah.
We don't like when you pull us over. Not when you pull us over, right? Whether we did something wrong, we didn't do something wrong, right?
Right.
How is it different? Is it different? Was it different for you, feeling like you're being pulled over and being a black woman? Or was this just a general anxiety about being pulled over?
No, because like I said, I have many experiences previously, and it would just be like, here you go, whatever. This time, because there have been so many police shootings of innocent people, you know, and not saying all police officers have this mindset, they don't. But what we see on TV, that plays a really big role in what we experience out on the road, right? So in my head, I'm like, I'm a black woman. I'm flying down this road. There's nobody else. His word could be against mine, because I've had police officers use their word against mine in the courtroom. So now I'm like, okay, maybe he's having a bad day. So I'm trying to diffuse whatever's there before it even gets there. You know what I'm saying? And just going through that mental and emotional cycle, it was too much for me. So I stopped speeding so much.
So now we're all safer on the road. And so Juan, you were saying too that even you, as a police officer, if you are off duty and you get pulled over, you experience the same type of anxiety.
Right. I can say that I do experience that same anxiety, just because of the type of car that I drive, and just the look that I have, you know, with having my hair long. And
so for those of you who can't see, you're not on Facebook Live. So Juan's got his hair slicked back in a ponytail, and he's got a beard and a mustache. And Juan is black, in case y'all don't know. I'm just saying. And he's big. He's a big guy.
Yeah. So it definitely, there is an anxiety there, because even, you know, with our own race, you worry about what that officer is thinking of you. You know, it's again goes back to stereotyping and what officers believe individuals that are, how shall I put it, of not goodwill, what they would look at them as, and the typical things that they see them as, and just that knowing that I fit that description, it's nerve-wracking, and I have to be on my P's and Q's and not relax myself to enough to say, oh, I'm a police officer, he's not gonna, you know, do anything different or out of the way for me. But no, I can't think like that, because that officer, and I've had instances where officers didn't even wasn't receptive to me being a police officer, you know, and also of being the same race. And that was a shock to me when it was, to me, I would say, a racial divide within, you know, our own culture. You know, it took me back, because I never thought that I would have to experience something like that. You know, just being an officer, I thought that, you know, as long as I do what I know, I wouldn't have that issue. But no, anxiety is there, has always been there, and it's no different from an officer to officer, or you know, someone who's not in law enforcement. I can see how the anxiety, you know, when getting pulled over by a police officer, can really take you out of your space. And all of the movements that you do have to be mindful of that, because the first thing you're going to think is, like you say, what are you reaching for? Why are you moving? That's some of the basic things you're taught as a police officer, to actually sit back and look and observe what's going on in that vehicle before you approach that vehicle, because you don't know, you know, if that person in that vehicle is really maybe just escaped from, you know, jail.
Right.
And so it's twofold, because I'm able to see both sides of the coin. So it's difficult to deal with at times.
Yeah.
Definitely is.
Yeah. I have someone said when she trained her son, she told him to don't keep your registration in the glove compartment. Put it here in the visor.
Up top.
So it's just you
Right.
just easily get it. You're not digging for anything, any place.
Right.
And that's helpful
Right.
also.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but, you know, the difficult thing was not the placement, it was why she was telling him
Right.
to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And two, with that, within our culture, we have to, even though that there's a fear out there of police brutality and officers abusing their powers, there are bad apples in
Every bunch.
Every
yeah.
bunch.
Doesn't matter what you do.
Right.
for a
But we
living.
have to teach our children that not to fear police to a extent, because then that's when those biases start coming in. That's when, you got a child. I've had many instances where a parent would say, I'm going to have that police officer get you. And the first thing I tell them, no, do not do that, because now you're making them fearful of police. And when they need help, they're not going to go to that officer. They're going to run from them.
Well, one, that's already happening. They just
Yes.
have to watch the TV.
Yeah, exactly. And
And unfortunately,
Mhm.
right, even though what they see on TV is not representative of the larger
Right,
police force,
exactly.
it's what's on TV.
Exactly, and that's the hard thing to try to get
Yeah.
through,
Yeah.
and it's just a matter of re-educating. It's a matter of, and this is a whole different, another topic we're gonna have to bring up, but bringing the community and police together, to start building bridges within both groups for understanding, So it that's another topic that we can get on.
But it's a topic, but the conversation is the same.
Yeah,
The conversation is, tell me what your experience of
Right.
bias
Right.
is. Tell me what your experience of discrimination is.
right.
Let me look inside myself
Yes.
to
Yeah.
see where my bias lies.
Mhm.
And if that conversation and if those questions are asked on both sides to the
Right.
other,
Right.
then what you're talking about in terms of bridge building,
Mhm.
just in the context that you're talking about,
Right.
can happen. It's the same conversation.
Definitely.
It's the same
Yes.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked some about what are the questions to ask, and we said the questions are just kind of asking about your experiences, being genuinely motivated to want to understand. So what about the individual who says, if you do that, you're really just stirring things up. Everybody doesn't feel that way. And so why should you? Or why go there? It just creates more chaos,
Yeah.
conflict.
I think if we encounter someone with that response, I think our response should be, you may find some biases that you thought that you didn't have.
Right.
So, or you think you don't have. In fact, as the conversation was going on, I was sitting here like, I'm wondering, what have I done? Because I think that I'm this super liberal, open-minded person. But I know that there's...
You think you are.
I think that I am. But until I encounter
Yes.
whatever it is,
Yes.
I don't know. But again, I think it's all about interrogating the self. And someone who would have that type of response of, why bring this up? You're just going to start more. I think that they may be themselves afraid of what may come out.
Yeah. Yeah. That question just brought to mind that individual is someone that's closing their eyes to reality and not wanting to see the truth behind it. And for them to do that, I like to say that when people do that, they're basically walking around with the eyes wide shut. You see but you don't see, or you see but you don't want to see, and you're afraid to even take that step to, do what's right.
It's part of a larger conversation on reconciliation,
Yeah.
a larger conversation.
And at some point, there has to be some form of reconciliation. Not everybody's gonna get it, because
Right.
you do have those on each side that says, I don't wanna talk about it, nothing's gonna change, let's just leave it right where it is. And then I feel like you have, this is me, this is not Dr. Sonja Sutherland. But let me say this. Let's put it out
Oh
there.
gosh, what's she gonna say now?
With the disclaimer.
I really feel like, our younger generation is what Kyle is talking about. Like, let's not talk about this. Like, that was our family's history. That was the past. Why are we even talking about it? We're moving forward. But when you look at it, we're not. We're still stuck in the same place.
I think, so I had this conversation
Oh, yay.
with a colleague, and back when the election results came in, the presidential election results came in a few years ago, I said, I think a lot of people are just shocked that this happened. And she said, no, they're not. People knew. Why are you shocked? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I thought we had moved past that.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, no, we haven't. What planet are you living on? Right? And I think we have that dichotomy, right, within the overall culture.
Mm-hmm.
We're not here anymore. What is the big deal? Yes, we are. We never left.
Right.
It's never been over,
Yeah.
right? And so those are the two things that's what you're talking about, right? When you say the younger generation is saying, when you say younger, do you mean like Kyle's age?
No.
You mean younger than him?
Younger than Kyle.
Okay. How old are you, Kyle? 20-something, right?
Yes.
Okay. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So I feel like under 22, 23, like I just feel like some parts of me thinks Flower Child, like the great movement, like, what was it? Oh God, I can't even think about it. I feel like some people, that generation is more of like, let it just be. It is what it is. Flower Child, we're going to be out here and all is well. I can't think of the Woodstock. Jesus Christ.
Oh, okay.
I feel like part of Woodstock is a part of this generation. But then you have the generations who've experienced the fire hose, the dog bitings. Senator John Lewis, or Congressman John Lewis, who was a part of it. You still have that generation that is alive, that understands what happened. And then when you watch movies like the Nat Turner movie, I love that movie. Oh my goodness, because you can see we've not moved anywhere. It's still here.
It's just different.
It looks
It's just different. I mean, you watch movies like
Right.
13th,
13th, I love that.
and you see
documentary.
how
Yes.
slavery is just in a different
Yeah.
box. It just is a different label.
When we went to Montgomery to see the tombs, it was powerful to see that, to see the sculptures, to see, there's one sculpture where you see all these men and they're like this, underwater.
So Monique, for those of you who
I'm
can't see
sorry.
her, she's got her hands up in the air.
Almost like the hands up movement,
Mm-hmm.
right? You had little kids that were submerged under the water. You had grown men where the water is touching their chest, and then you had some here, right? So what that showed me was, not only was this the passing through waters, through slavery, right? But this was also what was taking place currently with the hands up movement. Nothing is changing. And in order for it to change, we have to open it up and really take a look at it and have dialogue. And it's got to start somewhere. Because if not, we'll be talking about this in 20, 30 years, that nothing has changed. It'll just be different shootings and police brutality, and it's just a different form of what took place. I'm sorry, you don't know how passionate I am about this.
No, I'm sitting here trying to move my head away from, we will be sitting here in 20, 30 years talking about the same thing.
And that's good for me. I need a job. It was a little selfish. However,
Opportunist.
when Monique did talked about hands up and slavery and that movement, and we would be here, it made me think. The Black Lives Matter movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't consider it a movement, but hey,
Whatever.
you're right, whatever. However, for a while, they were prevalent, and you saw them, and now it's invisible again. So we go back to this racism and invisibility thing.
Yes.
It's like we haven't heard anything.
Right.
So do they come back out when someone else gets shot? Or what's,
Why not now?
Why not now?
Right.
When we're in this horrible political climate, right? Where are you?
Right.
When you're not a movement just for black people.
Right.
You're a social justice movement, period.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, like the saying goes, if you don't remember the past, we're doomed to repeat it.
Right.
You know, so that's something that we need to very much be mindful of, and not, so to speak, as you're saying, Monique, how the younger generation is just saying, let it go, there's nothing going on, and they have no concept or idea of actually what took place in order to really feel or see the pain and the hardship that we've experienced. So, you know, that's something that we have to realize. And another thing is that, like too, you were saying that we're not going to get that apology or that recognition that we so deserve. And also what I've heard people say, or a saying that I've heard, was that we have to learn to accept that apology that we're never going to get.
I know we have to go to break, but I gotta
Yeah,
say
we do.
this. Okay, we'll go. And
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so sitting there and listening to you, some people are going to say, you don't deserve an apology, you weren't there, right? So outside of being in Montgomery again, there's a museum. And as you stand outside the museum, you see young black boys shackled in orange suits, everything, right? So I'm watching this because I like to watch people. There was this group of young men who were of other ethnicities, Asian, white, maybe Hispanic was in there. And then I saw these two young black males standing behind me. And they were just chatting, weren't paying any attention to it. The ones behind me were looking up at what they saw, and they were impacted, right? There is a piece of that generation that sees, and there's another piece that don't see.
Right.
And generationally, we may not ever get an apology, but generationally, something has to be done for our children.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
it was
no.
it was eye-opening to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll talk more when we come back. You're listening to the Dr. Sonja Sutherland Show. Monique has fabulous things to continue to talk about when we go off the air, and I always think to myself, no, our listeners need to hear this too. And so really what she was talking about, and I'm going to let you say it, is she was talking about her experience at the museum in Alabama, and just continuing to talk about the impact that it had. And I think it's important for folks to hear how you talked about what, just the differences in reactions to what was seen and why, because it relates to the impact on mental and emotional wellness.
So as I was watching the two different groups of boys, and I say boys because they were teenagers, the ones that were in front of me were playing and laughing and could care less, and the teachers kept having to redirect them, like, hey, we're going, like, this is serious, we're going. But the ones behind me, like, I just kind of stood sideways so I could really get a good view of both parties, right? The ones behind me were staring at this picture on the outside of the museum wall. And what came to me was, they can see it because that's them. That's their brother, that's their uncle, that's their dad, that's their mom who's there. So I feel like, even though people say you need to let the past go, it is what it is. You're never gonna get an apology. You didn't experience it, whatever. We do experience it every day. When we see the men and women of color being killed, that's our people. That's who we are. And it could easily be me. You know what I'm saying? And there's no cry for the help for them. You know what I'm saying? And so it's such an impact when you sit there and watch these young men stare at the screen and see them being shackled. I won't tell you much about what's inside the museum, but there's this one wall where they have bars and they have holograms of the people behind the bars, right? Because the museum itself is actually, it was a housing place to hold slaves in between the port, right? And there was two little kids saying, I'm looking for my mother, I can't find her. And right down like 4 stalls was the mother looking for her children. And she's talking to you and she's like, I need help, right? So to experience all that as a mother, like, it took me a place that I didn't even, like, I had to process all the way driving back home, my friend and I. And it was just like, it had made such an impact on me. Like, I really feel like people who have not gone, because a lot of people in Montgomery won't go for one reason or another.
What are the reasons you've heard?
When we talked to a couple of the guards, they said that a lot of people in the town won't go because they want to leave the past where it is. They don't want to address it and they don't want to see it, and they feel like it's digging up a lot of issues for the town and the community.
It's painful.
It's very
Yes.
painful.
It's painful.
And mentally, if they don't deal with it, it's going to have an impact on that community even more. Like, we walked past a, not a well, but a fountain where they used to auction the people off. It's still there,
Wow.
you know? So I encourage people to go. I mean, it's a beautiful museum, beautiful memorial site.
Well, I'm definitely going to be going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, I'm
amazing.
definitely going to be going.
And Monique, as you were talking about this generation not really being connected to the past or wanting it to just be flower child-like, right? I have the unique pleasure of teaching in the AUC.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many students come in, and these are HBCUs, they come in and don't know their history.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they don't know it because it's
It's
not
not taught in school.
Right.
They know, I say the 3 majors, and that's MLK, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X. And that's all they know.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's so much more to your story than you're getting.
Yeah.
And for you to be sitting in a school, a part of the AUC, Atlanta University Center, this is basically where the movement started.
Yeah.
And those students at that time, because people like to see MLK and John Lewis and all these people as these 30 and 40-year-old people, they were not. They were children. They were students.
Yeah.
Right.
They were
Yeah.
18 and 19
Yeah.
during the time of their activism. So it's like, whenever I mention that, a light bulb goes off. Like, dang. I'm literally sitting in a classroom that some of these people that I've been taught about by my parents or grandparents sat in.
And on the same token, not only do minority children not know their history, white Americans don't know that history.
Right.
They've all been taught the same
Yeah.
whitewashed history,
Right.
right? And so there's a need for everybody to understand history in a very different way, in the way that it actually happened, from the perspective of blacks in this country, right? It opens up a whole new world of understanding for everyone. It puts shape to this conversation. Every time I teach that material to students, and I teach at a predominantly white institution, they are floored.
Yeah.
There's just no concept, right? And it creates an environment where these conversations make more sense. It makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much work to do.
There is. You know what, as you were talking, I was thinking about what it reminds me of, speaking of therapy, is doing couples counseling. When you have a couple that comes in who, one has had an affair and the other one is trying to heal from the aftermath of what has taken place,
Yeah.
right? You have one who wants to forget about it. Like, forget I ever did that, it was whatever. And then you have the other one that's like, no, I'm hurt. This really happened. Like, you don't care how I feel. And I feel like that's what I'm seeing here.
Yeah.
When we're talking about
Yeah.
different races, you have one that just is like, whatever, it's over. And then the other one is like, no, but it happened. Let's not sweep it under the rug. Let's deal with it. So,
Right.
And we can't. It's out there for everybody to see.
Definitely.
It's not under the rug
right.
at all. It's not under the rug. It's just now we're forced. People are forced to, and people don't want to be forced to do anything they don't want to do, or talk about anything they don't want to talk about. And even therein lies a piece of the oppression, right? People can't be forced. People who potentially have power to help make change can't be forced to have these conversations. They have to want to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
Right.
They have to want to have these conversations. And when you are faced with people who could have power to help make change, who don't want to have the conversations, there goes your invisibility again, just kind of raising its head. And it becomes a wall, a protection.
And perfect segue for yesterday, we all know was celebration of MLK Day. Well, our White House absolutely had nothing on their calendar to commemorate MLK.
Of course not.
And then decided to do an impromptu visit to the monument, the MLK Memorial in D.C., and place a wreath. If you want to talk about invisible, that's invisible.
At least he didn't go golfing. Last year he went golfing. So, just step by step. Improvement.
It's like one of the major figures in not only Black history, but American history, because our history is American history. It's like, how dare you? Like, you didn't even have the common decency to schedule something.
And to put what you're saying in context, every president has major activity, service-related activity that occurs on MLK Day,
Right.
planned, televised,
Right.
to make sure that people understand the importance of the day and the significance of what we're talking about or commemorating on that day. And that has not happened in this presidency. That has not happened. And so, what message does that send to our children, to us? We can sit here all day and talk about what we think about President Trump, but if we bring it home, what is the impact to us on a personal level to know that in the highest areas of government, it's just not important.
Yeah.
And our plight is not important. Our
I'm not
history
important.
is not important.
Okay.
It says, I am not important.
Yeah.
When you don't feel important, what's likely to run through your head at that point? What are the emotions, right? Other than anger, right? There's other stuff, right? And so we have to understand that all of this, again, plays into the psyche, it plays into the emotional and mental health, it plays into the concept of self that people develop. And when people develop a concept of self that is not filled with confidence and filled with value and filled with, then other things come into play, right? And then we see that in our counseling offices down the road.
Yeah.
We see that in rage. We see that in disconnection. We see that in just all kinds of different ways. All right. So we've talked a lot about this. I want to talk about something else.
Let's talk about something fun.
What fun should we talk about?
Well, there's this new oil.
Uh-huh.
Let's talk about it.
CBD oil. What is that? What is CBD oil? It's cannabis oil.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. It's cannabis oil.
It's the better part.
Educate
Some
us,
would
Monique.
say. Some would say it's the better part of, the plant, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
cannabid oil is what it is. Cannabid oil. Okay, so it is the better part of the marijuana plant, right? And so my understanding is that there is the farm bill that's been passed that has legalized the use of the cannabid oil with the removal of the THC. You're laughing.
I got glaucoma. I'm just joking. You gotta keep it light.
And the legalization is a big deal.
It is.
It's a big deal. I'll tell you, honestly, I didn't know just how prevalent the use was just all the time, regardless, just for things like depression, anxiety, pain, just cancer patients will use it
Yeah.
to manage, right? So it's used. We know that it is, and more in some parts of the country than in other parts of the country. So the legalization of it from the Farm Bill is a big deal. It's a big deal.
And I like the fact that you have so many medical professionals that are standing behind it because they do understand the research, how it helps not only cancer patients, but patients who have HIV, to migraines, depression, female anatomy. It
Epilepsy.
helps. Epilepsy,
Yeah.
you know?
Seizures.
Yeah, it helps. So why can't we? I really believe God gave us certain things out there to help us. And if this is one that's going to stop a little child from having multiple seizures, why not give it to them?
Yeah.
I mean, you have professional athletes who are going to California and to Las Vegas because they have been beat up so bad in their body that they don't want to be on the pills. They actually want the oil.
Yeah.
And they're like, you can take away the THC, I just need the oil.
And the THC, for clarity, is the psychoactive piece. That's the piece that makes you high, right?
Right.
And so we're talking about not promoting that people get high. We're not promoting that.
No.
Medicinal purposes.
Medicinal purposes. We're talking about cannabis oil where the THC has been completely removed. And so the psychoactive piece is not there. And it focuses then on just the healing properties in the cannabis oil. Yeah.
I was watching, I love documentaries, so I was watching the one on the two football players who are struggling because they've not been given, I guess, approval to, their doctor wants to give it to them, but because of where they live, it's not legalized or something like that. And so because they have a contract with the NFL, they can't take this, but they're like, I don't want to be on the pills that the doctor is giving me because it's having such an effect.
Negative
on me.
effects, yeah. Yeah.
But this isn't. So, who's right? who's wrong? You know?
Yeah. I mean, you
Or
got
is it another form
Who's
of
right
control?
and who's wrong today?
Yeah, yeah.
Today.
yeah, you got to think about, I mean, just simple opioids that doctors are giving to patients, how addictive it is versus using the CBD oil, which why would you take something that's more addictive than something with less side effects and does not have that strong addictive properties in it? I mean, it makes so much sense, but who am I? Who am I?
And then you mentioned something. It's natural.
Right. It's natural.
It's not made in a lab somewhere.
Right. Right.
It's all natural. And then we can get on the whole topic of why, the economics of it and who we're really affecting.
Yeah.
Well, it's legal now in the form that has been passed on the Farm Bill. And so they say that sales of CBD oil is supposed to skyrocket between now and 2022 to, gosh, I don't know, 40 times I've heard, 50 times I've heard. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. And it suggests that folks have been waiting for something that would be helpful, that's all natural. And we're in a period of time where wellness is, I don't know that there's been a bigger wellness focus in our history, in our culture, than there is right now, as opposed to a focus on sickness and just curing sickness. The focus coming from what can I do on a preventative level to ensure my health and my longevity versus wait until I get sick and then addressing it then. Yeah, and so this is part of that whole movement, natural products that really promote wellness. And so I'm personally excited to kind of see more on what the impact is, especially on things like depression and anxiety. And just, I'm really excited to see that. I can't wait for studies that will begin to to pop up all over the place to really begin to confirm the impact. I mean, that will revolutionize the pharmaceutical industry. The potential for it to revolutionize that is huge. Are you kidding me? Coming off antidepressant medications. Can you imagine what would happen
Something more holistic.
if what?
But
Oh
they don't
my
want to hear that
gosh.
though, 'cause
That's the issue.
What?
that money, they don't want to come off of that side of it. I think we need to plan a trip to a distribution center so we can see how this really operates. But that's out west. We don't have any in Georgia just yet.
Oh.
And then y'all can collaborate on the study.
Yes.
Listen. Now we talking. Now we talking.
Let's write a grant for it. Let's do
Well,
it.
You the grant writer.
I'm so glad that I'm transitioning from one job to another. This is probably going to put me out of business. But have booming business in another.
Oh man. How's this gonna put the cops out of business?
Well, that's marijuana seizures are a big thing in Georgia. Just through the airport alone, it's so much coming through Georgia that at the airport you're barely scratching the surface with what you're seizing. So it's real big. It's prevalent. Georgia is a hub
Gotcha.
for drugs.
Gotcha.
And so that's the big thing
Yeah.
when it comes to it being in Georgia.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, well, it's a good thing you're multi-talented then. I do think, though, people are going to have to do their research
Yes.
and be careful and be mindful of where they're buying it.
Absolutely.
Even with all of this that's happening, you still want to make sure that you're getting CBD oil that is in fact THC free. Unless you're using it for other purposes. But if you're wanting it for purely medicinal purposes, you want to do your research.
Yeah. Yeah, and depending on the amount of oil that you have up to there will be THC in the oil. It's just has to be less than what the CBD portion of it is.
Significantly
Yeah.
less. Significantly less.
Yeah.
Is there a certain amount, because I haven't read the bill, but is there a certain amount of oil that you can keep on hand?
I don't know.
That,
It's a
you
good
know what I
question.
mean?
Yeah. Let's do some more research on that.
Yeah.
Let's do some more research on that. Okay. All right. So, as we wind up the show, I just want to leave our guests with some final thoughts on what we think is probably the most important things that we want for them to make sure they come away with from our conversation today. And so, with CBD oil, do your research. Do your research. Make sure you get what you need to get.
Right.
In terms of racism, invisibility, and impact on mental health, and I think probably one of the things that we definitely want folks to remember is part of what will be helpful in bridge building will be genuine, authentic desire to understand the plight,
Right.
understand the experiences of people who are different than you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Understanding their experiences of discrimination and wanting to know, even if you can't really understand it, wanting to know and validate this has been the experience, and asking the questions not of them only, but of us, ourselves. What is, not just what is your experience of bias, but what is my experience of bias, and how have I potentially, unknowingly, perpetrated bias or discrimination? Yeah. What else? What's something else that we think folks need to really come away with today?
I think that we need to realize that it's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. It's definitely going to be relationship building, and we have to make sure that we understand, and we have to be able to agree to disagree. You know, I think that's one of the biggest things that most people don't look at when it comes to having dialogue, is that we are going to have disagreements as long as we respect one another and have that mentality to know that we all are different, and we all have different experiences, and we all relate to things differently. It's like no two people will have the same experience. It may be relatable, but no two people experience the same thing the same way. Yeah.
And my hope is that even as people agree to disagree, and will need to get to that space sometimes, that they don't use it as an excuse.
Right.
That they agree to disagree after there's been the dialogue, after there's
Right.
been the genuine engagement,
Right.
after there's been the genuine and authentic exploration. And then if you still need to agree to disagree, then you do that,
Right.
but not at the beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think if we just saw the humanity in each other, like, it's probably not gonna happen, but if we just saw each
So
other,
pessimistic.
realist. But if we just saw each other as being human, you know, strip the skin color, hair texture, all of that, you know, let gender, sex, all of that go. Just human to human interaction. This is who I am.
Right.
This is who you are.
Right. Realize there's one race, and that's the human race.
Right.
And when you say just human to human,
Mhm.
I imagine that you are really saying, we all have pain.
Right.
Let's just understand each other's pain. Let's be
Definitely.
willing.
That's a brilliant way to put it.
Yeah, well said. I agree.
I guess for me, I want people to really go see this museum. They did a lot of great work on it. They did. I mean, it's not just because I love history, but they took their time to tell the story between the Legacy Museum and then the Peace and Justice Memorial Site. It was super impactful for me to see it. And I would love for others who are listening, take your time, go see it. We have Black History Month coming up. Take a trip, take your kids, make a day of it, especially if you're within the southeast tri-states to Alabama. It doesn't hurt, and it's inexpensive, you know. And you never know, you might walk away with a better understanding of why certain people respond,
Yeah.
behave, react
Yeah.
to certain situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe what we should do is we should plan a trip and invite people to meet us up there.
Oh, that would be fun.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
Let's plan that for February, because we're at the end of January already.
Can you
Yeah.
believe it?
No, I cannot.
I definitely can't. Super Bowl is coming.
I know.
Oh my
And guess what? My
No one
team is
cares.
going again.
Really?
I was about to climb the wall, honey, in overtime.